Welcome to Sew with Monty. Today I'm going to show you how to do a combined facing. Now a combined facing is when the actual facing includes the armhole and the neckline in one facing. Instead of having a separate armhole and neckline facing, it's all together. So that's why it's called a combined. Now this is just a little sample mock-up, but this is our facing and this is the body. So it's not much different, but it's just to represent and show you how to do this facing. Now what I have done, this is the front facing right here. Let's get this out of the way for a moment. And I've cut it on the fold right here. And then I have put interfacing on the back side of it to keep it stable. I've done the same thing on the back. So this is the back facing. I've cut it on the fold as well. Put interfacing on it to keep it stable. And then I've sewn my shoulder seams of my facing together, 1/2 inch, and I've pressed them open. So that's the facing part. Now the body part is the same basic thing. We have the back, and I've cut it on the fold as well, like this. And then I've got the front. Now this is just a little mock-up. If this were a real garment, this would be the front bodice and the back bodice. And it goes like this. And again, I've sewn the shoulder seams together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So let's go over to the sewing machine. I'm very excited about showing you this trick of how to sew this, and we'll do our facing. What I've done, I've pinned my facing to my neckline with right sides together. So here's the facing, and here's the neckline, and it's inside out, just like that. So it's right sides together, and I'm going to sew around this entire neck with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So let's start sewing, and then I'll take you to the next step here. So we're going to line it up. I'm going to put it in with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to stay centered at 1. 3 is my stitch length, and I want to keep a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around through here. And I'm just going to sew all the way through and then come back and overlap my seam at my shoulder. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then after I'm finished that, I'll show you the next step for the neckline. I've sewn the neckline, 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, and then I've graded the seam. As you can see, I've cut the interfacing or the facing side down to about half the width of the actual seam allowance. Then I've come along, and about every inch I've clipped it. See how I've clipped it so that it will turn flexibly? Now you don't want to clip too deep. I try to keep it about 1/8 of an inch away from my seam. If you get too deep, you're going to cause facets on your neckline. So be careful not to over clip. Now the next step is we're going to go press it, and we're going to press all of this toward the facing side, and we're going to understitch here. So let's go to the iron, and I'll show you the next steps. So I've pressed the seam allowance toward my facings first, and now I've turned it over, and I'm going to press it again all the way around through here. First the back neck, and then we'll do the front. So it's nice and crisp. Now I'm not done with this. I'm still going to put an understitch here to hold it down. Sometimes you may not need the understitch, but you always want to assess your neckline and see. This one's pretty stable, and it probably would stay down without it. But I'm still going to do it just for good measure, because sometimes after a garment's laundered, it loses its memory and it doesn't shape up the same as it did when you were making it. So just for good measure, I'm going to edge stitch all around through here, just catching the seam allowance and the facing together, and about 1/8 of an inch away I'm going to do that. And then after we do that, I'm going to go ahead and show you what the next step is. We've got to finish the armholes. Now the whole beauty of this method of sewing this neckline, you do not have any hand stitching, provided your shoulders are not too narrow. If they're very narrow, you may have a little gap that you have to hand stitch. But mostly you can get away without any hand stitching. Plus the shoulder seam, instead of inserting one into the other and having little juxtapositions out here, you don't have that. This is going to be the cleanest armhole neckline you've ever seen. So after you get your edge stitch on your neckline, you want to come back in here, and you're going to, what I do is I go, oh, I want it to look like this, right? I want it to look like that. So I just go in here, and I take a hold of both seam allowances, my body and my facing, and I start pinning. And I just pin around through here, lining up my notches, making sure my sides are right sides together. Now it gets a little bit cumbersome, so you just have to be patient. because you're going to be pulling this out of this hole right here. You're going to keep pulling it out through here. But that's the magic behind it. That's what makes it look so good. It's a little bit awkward to deal with while you're doing it, but when you're finished, it looks amazing. So I'm going to pull it all the way out. What I want to do is get it pulled all the way out to where my seams are together, like this. I don't want to catch this. This is the body of the garment, so I don't want to catch that. I just want my armhole. Just like this. And I keep pinning till I get all the way to my shoulder. And then when I get to my shoulder, and I've got this lined up where, now you want to keep all this tucked down in there. Don't catch it when you're sewing it. When I get my shoulder lined up, I'm just going to pin it so that my two shoulder seams are right on top of each other. And I like to pin it twice, once in front and once in back. So what I'm going to be sewing is just this side of the armhole. Now you want to make sure if you get it pinned like this, see there, that's the front armhole. I want to make sure, just go in there and just make sure you didn't catch any part of the body. See, it's stuck up in here? So you want to make sure you keep that out of the way. So just to recap here, what you've done is you've got right sides together on the front armhole, and you pulled it through like this, and you're going to sew from the shoulder all the way down. So let's go back to the sewing machine, and I'll show you how to do this, and I'm going to go ahead and edge stitch my neckline. I have my neckline understitched, and now it's time to sew the front armhole. So as I showed you on the ironing board, we've pinned it along through here, and the body of the garment is up in here. So it's a little bit confusing when you start pulling it, but you don't want to get this body caught in your pins. That's the main thing. Because all we focus on here is this armhole edge. We're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to go just slightly past the shoulder seam. And then we're going to clip and grade it, and then we'll turn it and do the back armhole. I just love this method. It's a little bit confusing, but once you learn it, it makes the most beautiful combined facing sewing. And usually you don't have any hand stitching at all, and it definitely alleviates that big notch or bump at your shoulder seam. I'm just checking this to make sure I don't have a tuck in here. There we go. Always check under there because you don't want to catch the body in this seam. You might want to pin slightly deeper than a 1/2 inch just to ensure that you're not catching any of the body in there. Just every now and then check it out. Make sure it's laying flat and you don't have any of the body that's stuck inside this tubed up shoulder strap caught in your seam. So just go slow. There's no rush here. Again, never a rush. Sewing shouldn't be something you do in a hurry. And you just want to come all the way up, nice and easy, holding back the stuff that's in the body. And when you get to the shoulder seam, you're just going to come across the shoulder seam the least little bit, just about a 1/2 inch, and then just back up once so that you know it's secure, so when you start pulling on the other side, it doesn't pull through. Just going to back up a little bit there. And then the next step is, we'll come over here, and on this side only, we're going to grade the interfacing side, the facing and interfacing side. We're going to grade it halfway, and then we're going to clip this armhole. And then we're going to turn it and do the other side. So we're going to do this all right here at the machine. So let me get in here and get a good grade on it. Just make sure you're picking up the top and not both sides. And then when I get to the shoulder, I'm just going to go out like this. I can grab the rest of this when I do the back armhole. So it's graded. Now I'm going to clip just in the curve. Again, not going too close to my seam. I don't want to make a facet. Try to stay about 1/8 of an inch away, a small 1/8. And then when I have this, I take the body of the garment, see right here, and I pull it through. And you're going to see how beautiful. Now we haven't pressed or anything, but look how pretty that looks. You don't have any little bumps or unevenness there. No hand stitching required, and we haven't even pressed it. So let's do the back before we start admiring our work. So over here, I want the same thing. I want this to be turned under and this to be turned under and stitched. So I'm going to grab these two bottom edges right here, and I'm going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to start pulling this side around. So I'm going to put it flat, get my pins, and I'm going to pin just past a 1/2 inch so that when I get up here and I get bulk caught up in my shoulder, I know I won't sew over it. So I'm going to keep my pins just a little bit outside a 1/2 inch. Now if your seam allowance is 5/8, then you'll be pulling it just a little bit past 5/8. But see, you can see where we left off the last time. I'm pulling it out, and you're going to see the shoulder seam here in a minute. So I'm just going to pull the strap up through here, and it takes a little bit. You just got to be patient, nurse it a little bit. It will come and it will show. And that's our stopping point. See, this is our stopping point right here. This is where we left off. So all we have to do is pin this down, and then we're going to sew from the shoulder this time. We're going to start at the shoulder, and we're going to make sure all this stuff is pushed back out of the way. That's your body of your garment. Just push it out of the way, pin it down, and we're going to start at the shoulder this time, and we're going to come all the way around, grade and clip it like that. See, now my pins are a little bit farther away than a 1/2 inch. That sort of holds that stuff back in there, so I don't sew over the body of the garment or get it caught. I've put it in just past where I started or stopped. Now I'm going to go just back up a little bit, and then I'm going to go all the way around through here a 1/2 inch. As I get to my pins, I can just take them out and get them out of the way. Now this is one place where pinning parallel to your stitch is important, because the pins are holding back that fabric in there that could get caught in your stitch itself. But still keep straightening it out. Make sure you don't have anything caught in there. Go slow. It's so much easier to go slow than it is to rip. Anyway. So when we get to the bottom, I'm just going to back up a little bit right here. And then we're going to grade this side. We'll grade and clip this side the same way we did the other side. So I'm going to go, got a little catch here, so that's something I should have watched. I'm going to undo it just where my seam allowance is. I think I'm going to go back over that just to make sure I've got it caught. That's what I'm talking about. You just want to go slow and check yourself, so in case you have a little catch anywhere, you get it before it's too late. So always make sure that you're watching that. So I'm just going to sew that up just in case. It may have been fine, but it's better to be sure than have a hole in your garment. So now we're going to come back in, and we're going to grade this side, the facing side of our armhole. This is the back side now. I'm doing the same thing, cutting in about half the distance of the full seam allowance. Trying to be very careful that I don't accidentally start trimming on the front side, or the good side, the self side. Now I'm going to clip, again, about 1/8 of an inch away and about 1 inch apart in the curved areas, like that. And then I'm going to come in here. Here's the body part, and here's the shoulder part. I'm going to pull it out. Just straighten it out like this. And see how beautiful that's looking? Now we're going to press it. I'm going to press it, and then I'm going to show you the last step. Now I didn't do both. This would be identical to the other side, but I just did the one side. But we're not done quite yet. I'm going to go ahead and press it, and I'm going to show you the last step. So you can see how beautiful our shoulder, neckline, and armhole are. Isn't that nice? I love the finish of this. It's a bit challenging to turn and pull all that, and you get a little confused. But once you've done it a few times and you understand the results, the reward's well worth the confusion of getting to that point. Now, no, we never did sew the side seams up, right? That's never been done. So now we're going to sew them together. And what I do is I take the seam allowance and I push it in the same direction, and I make really sure that I've got my seam line right on top of itself. So you want to make sure that these two seams are right on top of themselves. And I like to pin before and after it so it doesn't shift off that point. And we're going to sew the side seam up here, and then we're going to come through here and sew here. Now once we do that, we'll do a little pressing on it, maybe a little clipping. We might have to clip that underarm just a wee bit, and we'll be done. Now remember, we just did one side. You'd have to do both sides, of course, but the other side is identical to this side. And when you get up here, get close to your pin, just feel to make sure your seam is still on. That's really important that that seam line stays on top of itself. Otherwise, it's not going to fold properly right here. And then I just twist, making sure I sew right along the edge, like this. And I'm just going to back up a little bit so it doesn't come loose. And then what happens is we're going to open this up and press it flat right here. And then when this gets pressed flat, this is the underarm, facing and the body. When you press this nice and flat and you roll it down like this, see how clean that is? And then I would just finish off the edge with a serge or one of my finished stitches on my machine. But how beautiful is that? And then if you want to tack it, you can just go in here and hand tack it right here, or you can turn it over on the right side and do the stitch in the ditch. And you just stitch about a quarter inch from the edge, ½ inch long and back stitch, and that'll hold it down. So either way, you can hand stitch it here or you can stitch in the ditch. And let me show you the back side. So this is the armhole, see? See how pretty and clean that is? Now this is a miniature because we were just making a mock-up, but you can see how beautiful that finishes out, and we haven't even finished pressing it yet. And that's called a combined facing.